Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us on this call today where we'll be diving into post-Christmas analysis and looking at what we could do differently for 2022. You're probably familiar with Atheon Analytics. They're a leading provider of data analytics and intelligence platforms in supply chain solutions. Atheon's SKU Track product is the market-leading flow of goods analytics toolset for FMCGs to help grocery supply chains improve decision-making. What you may not know is that Atheon curate and standardize their data and make it available to all of their paying clients through a tool called Data Share. And we're going to talk about the opportunity that presents on our call today. Enoua are a team of data scientists that take data from tools like Atheon's Data Share and build custom reports in Excel or clients' business intelligence tools. They can integrate with other data sets in the business to provide really powerful reporting tools that are bespoke to each client's needs and in the format that they need them. I'm joined today by Guy Cuthbert, CEO and CTO of Atheon, Ian Hall, COO of Atheon, and Neil Sturmey, CEO and founder of Enoua. So we know that there's been a lot of challenges affecting the industry, from raw material shortages, inflation, staff shortages, HGV driver shortages, packaging shortages, the list goes on. Let's talk about how different organizations have responded to those challenges. So Guy and Ian, what different approaches have we seen and who can we learn from?
I think certainly we've seen from the conversations I had in the sort of last 3 or 4 months of 2021 with some of our SKU Track customers, you could see those who were really facing into those challenges, super aware of them, planning and planning contingent options on particularly things like raw materials and packaging, working hard on the recruitment on the driver challenges, and really kind of nailing their use of information, their use of data analysis to make sure that they're as informed as possible and communicating as well as possible with their retail customers. I think when you've got challenging times, and you know that those challenges are going to impact your customer relationships, keeping close to customers, communicating well with customers and being on the front foot is critical. I can remember 2 or 3 conversations with chief customer officers, chief exec type contacts at 2 or 3 of our major customers where they were jumping on this opportunity to communicate more aggressively and more confidently with customers. And so analysis was critical to them, and they were asking an awful lot of questions of how could they sweat the data harder and so on. So I think that's the sort of the best case, and I'm sure Ian's got much more insight on this, but it seems that companies that were taking that proactive approach did a pretty good job of mitigating those risks. And so the problems that we saw through July, August, September, October were starting to reduce in November, December, and I think trading hasn't been too bad. But Ian, you can probably comment more on that.
Yeah, I think forecasting, if we think about the topic in general, forecasting demand is an incredibly hard thing to do for all sorts of reasons. There are so many variables that affect it, both internal and external. Knowing what you have to supply and when affects what your customers are going to order, but also right back through the supply chain to the raw materials that you order and the packaging and so on. I think a lot of suppliers have been doing this well for a long time. Equally, an awful lot of them, I guess, faced this for the first time about 18 months ago, or probably nearly 2 years ago now, when the first wave of panic buying happened in the initial lockdown. And if we think about it as a challenge of allocation of limited resource, then that was what suppliers had to face. So, for example, if when people went in, and you probably remember there was no pasta on the shelves 18 months ago, the pasta suppliers had to think about, well, which orders can I fulfill? I've just got orders for 10,000 units. I've got 1,000 in stock. Which are the best ones to fulfill? And traditionally, that would have been done by perhaps fulfilling your biggest customers first, like Tesco and Sainsbury's, or the biggest depots. And actually, it challenged people to start thinking about making better decisions using the available granular level data. So looking at, for example, if I've got 5 orders today, which is the best, which is the number one that's going to affect availability? It might be a small depot for a small retailer because they've got 0 stock, rather than just allocating it depending on the size of the retailers. So a lot of them faced that for the first time 18 months ago. And when we think about things like HGV, driver shortages or packaging shortages, really it's the same problem. It's an allocation of limited resource. If I've got 5 deliveries to make and I've only got 1 driver, again, which route do I want to send him on? Which delivery should I make? And what we're seeing more and more is that people are using the available data, looking at granular level, daily, SKU, depot combinations of data to make those decisions. What you can't do is do it by managing averages and aggregated data, which I think a lot of people did in the past. So for me, there was a bit of a shift 18 months ago, at least in the awareness and the kind of conversations around allocation of limited resource. And really, that's the same challenge today, whatever the root cause of that problem is.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it's easy to look at all these as discrete, separate problems, but it does all boil down to this challenge of allocating limited resources. And whilst if you fix one of those issues, you fix the packaging issue, but the driver problem's exacerbated, you can't improve supply. Nonetheless, if you're working on all those things, you can ensure that you're maximising supply. And certainly, I think the numbers that we've seen, and I think it's corroborated by people's personal experiences, that availability in stores hasn't been as bad as perhaps we had feared. We've been seeing far fewer gaps on shelf over the past 6 weeks than we had perhaps expected back in September, October.
Okay, brilliant. And are there examples of specific reports that could provide meaningful intelligence for better planning for Christmas 2022?
Well, I'll let Ian get onto the planning for 2022 in a moment, because he's got a lot of strong opinions on that. But Neil and I probably have views on how information can be used to best understand this Christmas, and that then helps us to plan for next year. And certainly, I think, using the kind of data that SKUtrack provides in terms of a really rich understanding of what stock was where, how did that impact availability, and what did it lead to in sales is key. But I think we recognise that it's unlikely to be enough. There'll be lots of other factors that you want to bring in to understand why shipments were as shipments were. And that means integrating all of that SKUtrack trading data with internal data, which could be internal stock levels, packaging levels, fleet operations, etc. So putting multiple different data points together to look at not only those external trading factors with customers, but internal factors, production factors and supply factors is important. So a simple one on the top of my head would be some kind of consolidated stock picture where you're drawing not only stock in trade in terms of what's out there in stores and depots of customers, but also what's at existing production or warehousing facilities, what's in the current production plan, and understanding how stock is moving over a medium-term period, typically 12, 13 weeks, something like that, and really understanding how stock movements and production and supply challenges into production impacted the ability to get stock out into customers from sort of November through January. That's a great indicator, and that's the kind of thing where you need to pull.
I think Christmas is complex at the best of times, because like any forecasting or any promotional forecasting, there's a whole range of factors that affect it, and some of those were external and we faced for the first time over the last couple of years. So things like lockdown affected family sizes on Christmas Day. So I don't know, I don't know, have the data for this, but I imagine more people bought turkey crowns than full turkeys, for example. So there were loads of external factors that affected that. I think one thing that the best practice in terms of looking at historic data to review what we can improve for next year is really simple. It's about, and Guy touched on this, it's about combining sales analysis and sales data with availability. So it's not just looking at sales in isolation and looking at what sold well or when it sold. It's also looking at availability, because you might look at a product that didn't sell particularly well this year, but the reason for that was because it wasn't on the shelf. And then you can start to get into the more granular reasons for why it wasn't on the shelf, whether the orders weren't sufficient or you didn't have enough raw materials. And this is where combining all of that flow of goods beyond what SKUtrack does, back to raw materials and sourcing, is really, really important. But I think all too often people do things like, they're all doing it now, post-Christmas analysis of what went well, what didn't go so well. And they're perhaps comparing sales to a target, but they're not combining that availability and supply chain information, which might give you the real reason as to why that product didn't sell particularly well.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it is that kind of whole supply chain, but perhaps also looking at it in stages rather than just looking at the end or just looking at the beginning. But Christmas has happened. I'm sure lots of suppliers had their plans, had their forecast of what was going to happen. And so using one of those other data sets is incorporating and integrating your production forecast, how that then actually materialized into deliveries to depot and sales in store. So yeah, using the your forecast data and doing analysis on that, along with what actually, as Ian said, not just what actually sold, but what shipped, what was at what point in that supply chain, and doing that analysis, now before another priority comes along, because that's when you need to learn the lessons, get the data together now, do the analysis, learn the lesson, prepare for next time.
I think the other thing I'd like to add to that is this this idea of profitability, because what we don't look at very often, well, at all in SKU Track, is the real cost price of stuff, and you as a supplier, whether you've actually made any money. And probably at no more time than Christmas is that a really important issue, because you've got things like markdown. So where you've got short life product which has to be reduced to clear because, I don't know, brandy butter, you've got a load of it, you can't sell it for 3 months afterwards because it's going out. Or you've got Christmas only lines, like things like mince pies or gifting items, boxes of chocolates, that kind of stuff, where the retailer then marks it down the week after Christmas. And I'm sure we've all been in and bought cheap stuff in the last week. But because those things are marked down, that bill then goes to the supplier. So you may have had a really fantastic Christmas sales period where sales were up 10%, but if 50% of the stock that you had there was still there after Christmas and then marked down, you might find that you lost money on that product or that range of products over Christmas. So combining margin information, markdown, stock holding, all of that together is a complex thing to do to get to the root of, did we actually make any money? And this year, that's probably exacerbated by the fact that when you put your cost prices together, you might have been forecasting that freight costs from China were 1,500 quid per container, and actually they were 15,000 because the freight costs from China went up by a factor of 10 last year. So getting to true profitability, because lots of people can be really busy selling lots of stuff and then making no money at the end of it. And surely for most shareholders of most companies, they're going to take an interest in, did we actually make any money? And nothing in SKU Track will tell you that. That's a really complex thing to do that requires lots more information, lots more data to be kind of brought together.
That's a good point here, because it also comes back to, just because a line was unprofitable this year doesn't mean it's going to be next year. And so understanding the component parts of that and using reports and detailed analysis to break out what those component costs were. The exceptional freight costs, as an example, it's unlikely that freight costs are going to be as high next year. And so making sure that you don't make bad plans on an exceptional year is kind of critical, which comes back again to understanding what those sales volumes were and whether availability impacted them. If availability drove down the volume and then you sold more through a markdown, that's a real problem, but it's not necessarily going to be the same next year. So yeah, it's taking those component parts into consideration.
And that's true of all suppliers and all products, but it's no more true, I suppose, for things like gifting items that are sourced from the Far East, where they will be making decisions right now and locking in orders in February for Christmas 22, because there's probably a 3 or 4 month lead time on getting product from China. It needs to be in a retailer's depot by August, so it hits the shelves in September. You know, everyone moans every year because the seasonal aisle suddenly appears in Sainsbury's in September, but the reality of that is you have to place orders in February. So people are actually making decisions now and going to retailers with suggested cost prices, suggested order quantities, and getting all of that right with 10 months still to go is a really complicated thing to do. So for those guys in particular, anything that's sourced with long lead times on a consignment basis, where you're agreeing a quantity with the retailer 10 months in advance, is everything we've just talked about times 10 in terms of complexity.
But at least if you're using the data, using the data that's at your fingertips and creating insights. You might not be perfect, but it's a whole lot better than guesswork.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. You know, I think the carving out reports that make sense to you and your business, that making sure that you've got information portrayed in a way that fits with your other business systems and decision-making processes is critical, which means customizing you know, reports to combine internal and external data like SKU track data, but presenting it in a way that allows you to make decisions and feed that content where necessary into your internal tools. That's where I think, you know, custom reporting and custom intelligence becomes really critical.
And things like scenario planning, you know, what if analysis. What if we have a lockdown next year? What if, I don't know, inflation goes up by 5%, or all sort of, or exchange rates, you know, between the UK and China, or freight rates. There's a whole load of variables in that, and almost impossible to predict. But as Neil says, some information is better than none, and being able to do scenario what if planning, I think, is really useful as well. And again, that's something that requires a whole load of additional data and discussion around what those variables might be. Yeah,
we're going to argue that the SKU track data is materially useful to that, but clearly it needs to be pulled into spreadsheet tools and so on for it. So it comes down to that ability to use the data to power decision processes.
Yeah. And so I was going to also just add that, yeah, the data, we can all think that there's loads and loads of data sources and it's becoming a massive problem now just to wrangle with that data. Actually, you can still be you know, intelligently selective about which pieces of that data that you surface up to different audiences. So yep. Yes, bring together almost as much data, different data sources as you can, but that doesn't necessarily also mean surfacing all of the views of those data to everybody. Different individuals within the, you know, within the suppliers are going to have interests in different views. So being able to customize what the view of that same consistent data set is, but the different views of different people can make different people in your, you know, in the organization make the decisions that are right for that for them to make.
And I think SKU track is always a really good starting point, because using visual analytics helps you to frame those questions. I think all too often people assume they know which questions to ask, but by seeing things like trends, patterns, anomalies, outliers visually, it draws your attention to things that you perhaps weren't expecting to see, whether it's, you know, availability versus sales or whatever, and seeing those, it enables you to frame the right questions to ask. And at that point, it's then when you need to drag in all the other data to, you know, and do the what if scenario planning, variables and what have you, to be able to answer those questions to a greater degree of accuracy.
Yeah, I think one of the some of the feedback that we get from clients is that they would love to be able to pull these reports together, but they've got the data, but they don't necessarily have the time or the resources or the in-house expertise, or their technical teams are too busy for this kind of analysis and reporting. So this is where Enoua can come in. They can build these reports on behalf of the clients within a matter of days for a relatively small investment. So Ian, how can suppliers work more closely with buyers?
This is I've been thinking about this. It's a very broad question, so there's lots of answers to this. I mean, starting point is using available data. So what buyers really want to see is meaningful analysis where they trust the numbers. All too often buyers and suppliers can spend half their meeting debating why their numbers are different, and suppliers are, you know, often cynically seen as coming in and presenting the data that suits their narrative, or the story they want to tell, or the business outcome that they want to achieve, whether it's more line listings, deeper distribution, more promotions, whatever it might be. So I think a really good starting point is using the retailer's own information. While some of the retail systems might be quite antiquated, most retailers provide really good information, not necessarily in a usable format, but the information itself and the data is good. So when you can use that data and be playing interesting insights back that can be quickly and easily articulated, but some complex insights and analysis using that retailer's own data, that's when you start to be seen as a trusted source of advice, and when you can start to build better relationships. I think in addition to that is understanding what a buyer's objectives are. So primarily a buyer is there to try and grow a category profitably, easy for me to say. So try and grow a category profitably. So they want to get incremental sales. They're not just interested in selling one product at the expense of another. So one big brand A compared to big brand B. They want to try and grow the category sales, and they're interested in things that are achieving that. So it might be new products that are going particularly well, new subcategories within their category that are starting to perform compared to the rest of the market. They're also really interested in how are they doing compared to their competitors. So what are their competitors doing that's working well or not working quite so well. So anything where you can help a buyer achieve their own objectives in a way that is a mutual win for both supplier and buyer. And typically that's achieved through a joint business plan. So things like growth incentives. If I can double my sales with you this year, you get rebates and so on and so forth. But primarily it's about using the data that the retailers make available and presenting it back in a way where you can quickly and easily articulate stories and analysis. And we think that using visual analytics is the best way of doing that.
It's fair to say we've seen particular customers get particular wins on things like being smart about distribution of products. So being willing to go to a retailer and say, look, we think this product is slightly over distributed. We've got it in too many stores. It's not working for you or us as we'd hoped. But here's 3 other products that we believe for these reasons would benefit from a wider distribution. So rather than just going in and sort of pounding the table with your fist to say, I want better distribution of these 3 products, offer something as a concession and do that using data, you can often find that actually has little or no impact on profit to either party in terms of the loss, but the gains made by getting that better distribution on other products are significant. And so those are the kind of behaviours that we see the best of our customers winning at consistently, because they're really making well-articulated cases to the buyer. And ultimately, as Ian says, the buyer wants to achieve greater profitability for the category. They haven't necessarily got the ability to do all that analysis all the time. They don't have the time. They're often incredibly data-rich and insight-poor, is the phrase you've always used with me over the years. But they've got certainly a mass of data available to them, but they simply don't have the time to generate the insight. And if you can come in as a supplier and show something really practical that increases category performance by trading one product out and another one in, that's often well received. And plenty of brands don't think about doing that on their own products. They want to do it only on competitor products, but actually there's smart improvements to be made simply by looking at better distribution of your own products.
I think the other thing is, don't forget supply chain. I think so many sales teams or category or brand teams will go in and talk about the sales of a product. They'll talk about promotional strategy, listings, depth of distribution, price points, all those things. But actually, if you want to increase sales by 5% next year, get your supply chain right. Make sure it's on the shelf when the customer wants to buy it. And also that helps the buyer, because nothing frustrates customers more than going in and seeing lack of availability and empty shelves. So by solving that problem, you probably hit a good way of your sales target anyway, a good proportion of it, and it makes the buyer's life a lot easier. So in addition to all those other things, get the supply chain right, work with your supply chain colleagues. In some companies, they can work as 2 completely separate functions and the sales have nothing to do with it. But getting supply chain right, making sure you're using that granular level detail that we talked about, fulfilling orders to the right depots on the right day to make sure that the product actually is on the shelf when someone wants to buy it, is something that is still often overlooked by sales and account management teams.
I think it's worth noting that when we talk about taking insight to a buyer, what we really mean is helping increase the buyer's understanding of the challenges and opportunities that jointly you're facing. And supply chain's a key example of that. There are consistent challenges. We've talked about some at the head of this conversation. Consistent challenges that everyone's facing, and certainly being able to articulate in real detail by having a good understanding of what's happening at a product level and at a daily level. So you can articulate, we know we had issues on these 10 days last month on these 3 products, but here's how we addressed them. This is what the impact was. It was less than we thought it would be at shelf. That kind of detailed understanding inspires a huge amount of confidence, and that puts a buyer in a position where they're much more willing to listen to your arguments if they've got that level of confidence in your understanding of what's happening. Too many account managers approach a buyer with a fairly sort of aggregated, high level, broad trend picture, and that's not necessarily something that people can act on.
I think there's one final thing I'd add, which is celebrate success. So often suppliers wait to be asked a question by a buyer, and that can typically be, why didn't you deliver this product? We've had a report where we've got low availability, or they're trying to fix something or analyze something. But quite often when you're doing this post-Christmas analysis, loads of things went really, really well. And that can be true of any promotion or any new product listing. And I think there's almost an implied understanding with a lot of small suppliers that, well, the buyer knows that already, or they've seen that, or they'll make a really good decision, or they've got the access to fantastic data. So when a product's done really well, they're bound to put it in more stores and greater distribution. And of course they're not. You know, a buyer might be looking after 2,000 products and firefighting all sorts of issues that have occurred. They haven't got the time to analyze the data that you have. So there's a part for the buyer, which is this kind of wisdom of crowds. Having well-informed suppliers makes it easier to make better decisions. But also, if you can be celebrating success and showing a buyer what went well, we told you to list this product, you did, and look what's happened. Isn't that great? We should do more of it. Again, that just helps to build that longer term relationship, that sense of being a trusted source of advice. But also it makes life a lot easier when you're trying to get recommendations through, if you're associated with this kind of proven track record of doing things well. And I think all too often people don't shout about the things that have gone really well.
I'm just going to echo and emphasize what you just said, Ian, but kind of if the first step is bringing the data together and generating those insights and making some right decisions, then next step is being able to articulate that and demonstrate to the buyers that you know what you're doing and you are using that data, and you can present to the buyers in a form that's understandable by them, that what has happened, basically. So not just presenting simple spreadsheets of numbers that you might understand but have make no sense at all to a buyer, but being able to present the analysis to the buyers that you've done, that you know why everything has happened, and why some things were great and why some things were problematic.
So
the most extreme, sorry, I was going to say the most extreme step you can do to help the buyer there, Neil, thinking about that point, is find out how they need to use the data. If you can give them data in a spreadsheet that's already ready for them to consume straight in their world, all power to you. It puts you in an even stronger place if you can conform to their sort of standards of how they like to present data. Sorry, Emma.
Now, I think that's a really good point, Guy. I was just going to ask if, Neil, where are there examples where Enoua could help suppliers join up data to offer that meaningful insight to buyers? As
I guess Guy was getting at, being the first step, bringing the kind of data together without getting all kind of super technical, but in your kind of huge data lake or whatever, but being then able to present different views of that in the right form. And the buyer, I guess, as I was saying, there'll be different audiences for that same kind of superset of data, and the buyer is one participant, one type of audience, being able to present in a form that's either as they explicitly asked for, but or in a form that is highlighting the key points that they would want to, or that you want to get across them, that they would be interested in seeing, that is appropriate for the buyer, not just a screenshot of that internal report that everybody in the company gets, and everybody has to try and figure out for themselves the answer to the question that they want to know.
Brilliant. And then lastly, what are the things that we could do differently over the Easter period?
Well, I'll jump in with the first thing, which I think is something that comes out of all seasonal activity, but beyond that, it goes into any kind of promotional or launch activity, which is really being able to monitor performance closely on a day-by-day basis. I think there are a number of dashboards in SKUTrack that help to do this purely on the trading data. That is, understand day one of a product launch, how it's selling, day one of a promotion, how a product's selling, and start to identify stores which may not have launched effectively. But even prior to that, he's looking for things like the stock build into stores, the stock builds at depots days before that, so that you think about this flow of goods that SKUTrack helps to illuminate in terms of, if I'm going to get a seasonal product for Easter in place in time for Easter, it needs to be in store on this date, which means it needs to be in depot on this date. All that is meat and drink for all supply chain operators, but being able to monitor the progress of that on a day-by-day basis, and not only do that specifically from trading data, so all that customer trading data you get in SKUTrack, but also to pull that in with your own internal data, maybe weeks ahead of the launch, so that you can watch your own production output, your load into your warehouses, movement from your warehouses into retailer. That lets you spot things like, hang on a minute, we haven't received orders from these 2 depots that we would have expected to have ordered by now. We're going to contact those depots, because unless we get product in the next 3 days, they're going to miss the opportunity to get product into store. That whole sort of profiling the project, if you like, that is the run up in the weeks before a seasonal launch, is true for Christmas, Easter, but it's true for promotions and so on. And I think an awful lot of organisations end up being reactive to trying to correct those issues once they've been identified, rather than predicting them by monitoring the stock build and the previous signals on a day-by-day basis. So that ability to get granular data from SKUTrack to represent trading positions, pull that into custom reports in your own preferred spreadsheet tools, and mix that with internal data about production and internal stock holding, gives you an ability to track to execute with the best possible chance of success, because you remove all of those availability issues that could crop up day 1 to day 7 of launch. And yeah, we've got Pancake Day coming up for some suppliers. Easter, obviously, a big one for a number of different categories. These are practices that should be in place on a year-round basis. Neil, I don't know if you've got any suggestions to add to that.
Probably more just repeating the same message about looking at data in different views, but perhaps even to be so overwhelmed, so too much data, not enough insight, but having automation, so having the data prepped in a view that makes it easy for you to monitor it on a daily basis. It shouldn't be a chore to go and track what's happening every day. That's computing automation makes that easy for us. And so being able to track the run up to a promotion on a daily basis, there's definitely benefit in that, as Guy said. But the important thing you need to do is make it not onerous and make that an easy thing for people, the right people in the organisation to do. Because a lot of times we hear clients saying, "No, I don't do that. It's too much. We don't have the time to prepare it or get it into the right format." Yeah, it'd be great if we had, but we just don't have the time to worry about daily data. So have the data in dashboards and able to be drilled into, but updated and refreshed automatically. What you're able to do with the feed from SKUTrack, so that it's not onerous to look at that view updated every day.
That's a really good point, Neil. I think that point about automation, we at Atheon take it for granted somewhat that SKUTrack just makes this information available in a consistent form for all retailers on a daily basis. And I guess it would be easy for our customers to think that's solely the sort of provision of the SKUTrack front end. Of course, as you guys have demonstrated ably with a number of customers, that's absolutely achievable inside spreadsheet tools. So if you're an Excel fan, and you're used to having to manually go and collect data from SKUTrack and put it into your own spreadsheet once a week, why not automate it? Automate that completely, and then you can have it every day, and that opens up a whole raft of use cases and activities that are nice to have. And as you say, lots of customers say, oh, we'd love to do that, we just don't have time for it. Well, you do have time for it if it's automated, built automatically and updated daily. Then you can spend your time in the reports rather than trying to build those reports. So every one of the SKUTrack customers that spends any time at all cutting and pasting or copying or downloading data should be thinking, hang on, I don't need to do that. I could be automating this on a daily basis straight into my spreadsheets, and that transforms the nature of the analysis that you do on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. So we have in-flight promotion trackers. There's templates available on the Enoua website, which any of the SKUTrack clients can log into and download. If you are a premium user of SKUTrack, you will get access to data share for free as part of your paid subscription with SKUTrack. So if you don't have the skills in-house to build the reports, then come and have a chat to Enoua. But if you are a client of SKUTrack's, all of this is available. So you should be able to get these reports built and have this kind of daily updates for things like how well your promotions are executing in time to take action.
And yeah, the custom, the bespoke, or custom reporting and dashboards sits alongside SKUTrack, because what you want to be able to do is make it really easy for the executives or whomever, at whatever level in in your organization to see the view that they want. And then they ask the question, or you've got the supply chain team spotting potentially an issue and asking a question, and then able to get into the SKUTrack application and drill in, and somebody will do the analysis and find out the real root cause that perhaps in the first case they might have had to spend a bit more time in SKUTrack kind of exploring around, looking for a problem, but actually they kind of can be more directed as to where to, what to focus on, and then using SKUTrack to find the answer to the problem.
Any other closing thoughts before I close off the call?
I think we've covered a lot of good ground there.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on the call today. If you don't already have store level data or access to data share, then please speak to your representative at SKUTrack and they'll be able to help you with that. We have the reports, as I mentioned, available on the Enoua website for you to download free of charge. You also have resources available to you, such as joint business planning resources. There's an ebook available on the Atheon website, which we'll put a link to below this video. And you can also register to attend a joint business planning lunch and learn, which is taking place on the 26th of January. And there's also a true demand lunch and learn coming up as well for SKUTrack clients. So we'll put details of that below this video. Thank you very much for watching. We really, really appreciate your time. Thank you, everyone.